A lot of people are already asking, is there some conspiracy theory behind this? Because we've seen we're at number 4. This is the fourth airplane accident since President Donald Trump's inauguration. And so many people are wondering, what's the connection here?
Unfortunately, we'll see. We don't know that necessarily it's even the controller's fault. But one thing we do know, there was a lot of vision, and people should have been able to see that, at what point do you stop? At what point do you say, wow, that plane's getting a little bit close? So this is a tragedy that should not have happened.
Former FAA deputy and acting administrator. He is also a former Air Force and commercial pilot. So just a wealth of experience with all of this. Daniel, we're still sort of looking at this video, and I think we're going to learn even more from these passengers because some of them, I think, are still quite in shock. I mean, look at this upside down plane on the tarmac. What goes through your mind as a pilot about what the dynamic here was and how this could have happened?
All right. Well, let's come back to the plane crash in Toronto that happened yesterday, and the fact that Democrats seem to be pointing the finger of blame at the president. I'm not quite sure how you make that connection when the crash occurred in a different country. But here's what Chuck Schumer said. He said, quote, "To those asking whether it matters that the plane's destination was in Canada, the flight took off from Minneapolis. The FAA was still responsible for inspecting the aviation equipment, and Trump just let go of FAA safety specialists. We have no idea what caused this crash. We have some video of it coming in for a hard landing, but we don't know if it was a failure of equipment or if it was weather, if it was pilot error, or if it was something else. And yet you get the minority leader in the Senate immediately pointing fingers at the president. Your response?
It's incredibly irresponsible for Chuck Schumer to say such a thing when the investigation is still underway. And as you rightfully pointed out, John, this crash unfortunately took place in Canadian airspace with Canadian air traffic controllers overseeing it. And the facts about the FAA are that no air traffic controllers have been let go by Secretary Duffy or this new administration. In fact, Secretary Duffy has put great emphasis on hiring the best and the brightest air traffic controllers who want to be part of the FAA, and President Trump signed a very strong executive order to ensure that the FAA and all federal government agencies are focused on merit and skill-based hiring. We want the best and the brightest, the most competent individuals in positions, especially of public safety at the FAA, the Department of Transportation, and all departments across this federal government so we can best serve the American people. So while Secretary Buttigieg and the Biden administration sat on their hands when it came to aviation safety for 4 years, this administration is taking it seriously and is actively recruiting the best and the brightest to join this very important field.
This is breaking news, ladies and gentlemen. We have a Delta flight that has crash landed in Toronto Airport. But what I wanted to share with you guys is insider intel information from a former captain by the name of Mike Cofield on how this Delta plane crash landed at Toronto Pearson Airport. I want to give you guys the full story, so go ahead and take a listen. And it left a Delta connection CJR 900 upside down on the runway at Toronto Pearson International Airport. Now, the question is, how in the world does an airplane end up belly up, upside down after landing? So guys, if you haven't already, please take a second, hit the like button for the video. Thanks so much for subscribing.
Former commercial pilot and aviation expert, Captain Mike Caulfield joins me now. Mike, thank you very much for getting on the phone with us on this President's Day. As you look at this, give us a thought about what goes through your mind.
Well, thanks for calling it. Again, this is a miracle. But there are very few instances globally where an airplane ends up literally on its back. I mean, it's remarkable. Now, I've looked at some early data, as you both know, the NTSB will sign a memorandum of understanding with the Canadian Authority probably within the hour, because Canada will take authorization of the investigation. But they have an agreement with the United States, so that'll be executed hopefully very shortly because Delta is a U.S. company. The remarkableness of it, as we were just saying, is the right wing's off. The front nose gear is up. I mean, it's out. We don't see the main gears. At 500 feet, the aircraft was only doing 126 miles an hour, so it was slow, and it was descending at almost 1,100 feet a minute. Now, at a normal glide path at 500 feet, you'd only be doing about 500 feet descent rate, or 400 feet, 600 at the most. So it had an aggressive descent rate at 500 feet.
Wow.
It'll be interesting to see where the throttles were and where the thrust was at that point. I'm just again guessing. I haven't seen any live video yet, but
yeah, that's what we're waiting for.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, absolutely. No, your information is very helpful here. 70-mile-an-hour winds. At what point would air traffic control say, you know what, go back up, let's land you somewhere else, or let's circle for a little bit, hope these winds die down? At what point do they say don't land with winds?
Now, what's really interesting here is I'm not hearing a whole lot of talk yet about air traffic control being at fault here. They're still working on the investigation details right now. And this is what we typically see. When there's a brand new accident, incident, whatever the case is, there's a lot of preliminary information and data that comes out really, really quickly. But then we realize later on, as multiple footage feeds are provided and investigators are able to look at the situation from multiple different vantage points, then a clearer picture is able to be established. So obviously this is breaking news and this just happened. So investigations are still underway, but I just wanted to kind of like share that with you guys to kind of keep you in the loop, because again, we don't have all of the details yet. And of course, the black box that's on the aircraft, once that's analyzed, is going to give us a lot more detail than what we have from the ground, from passenger footage. There was actually footage received, and you guys might have seen it on my previous video. There's actually footage captured from passengers on neighboring planes that were on the tarmac that had actually captured what was going on. So that will actually be very, very helpful to analyze.
Well, that's another interesting. The captain's authority holds more weight than you can imagine. The airport authority themselves in Canada could close the airport if they felt winds and it was unsafe to operate at the airport, period. If the captain has a form that he can look at in his computer or book that actually shows maximum winds, maximum crosswind, and maximum headwind, and of course tailwind. You don't ever land in any more than 10 knot of a tailwind ever. So they're going to go back and look at that immediately too. 70 knots is a lot. So unless it's coming right up and down the runway, and can I add one thing to that?
Please.
Technically.
Mike, are you there?
Hello?
No,
yeah, I'm sorry.
We got you. Go ahead.
Can I add one technical thing to that? The way that works is you have a speed that's called VREF, and that's the speed that you normally operate on under temperature and wind conditions of a normal day. And so if the winds are 70 miles an hour, you either add anything over 10 knots, you add half of the wind plus any gust. So in this case, you'd have to have added almost 50, 60 knots to the approach speed. Well, they were way slow. And I'd have to go back and look at what the exact winds were. But yeah, at one point you would say, as a captain, if I'm descending at 1,100 feet a minute at 500 feet and I'm slow, then I would be executing the go around.
Yeah, you would.
You know, this is interesting. This is like the second time that we've observed or heard during an investigation or initial analysis that there were some clear warning signs. In this case, this insider, former pilot Captain Mike Cofield, has indicated that the plane was way slow coming in for the landing. Very similar to what we saw and heard during the Washington, D.C. Collision between the American Airlines aircraft and the Black Hawk helicopter, where the helicopter was actually way too high. If you guys remember, the Black Hawk helicopter was somewhere between 100 and 200 feet too high. And obviously, that was a critical factor in what led to the collision. And here we have this Delta plane, as this particular insider, former captain Mike Cofield, has indicated that the aircraft was coming in for a landing way too slow. I wonder how much this is going to play into the role of the investigation here and how the aircraft ultimately ended up flipping upside down upon landing.
Be putting the nose back up and going back up for another round potentially, as I understand it.
Or find an alternate airport. Absolutely.
Right. Why would they have been going so slowly, do you think? Is this are they headwinds? Is that wind holding them back?
I haven't seen, forgive me for this, but I have not seen the actual current winds. I know the runways in Toronto, I've landed at 100 times. They're very, 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 very long. So that's a good thing.
Yep.
But I haven't seen what direction relative to the runway heading in terms of how much off the nose. It's remarkable to me that the airplane's upside down like this.
It's incredible.
And now, it's. I know that someone may or may not. I mean, there's been some injuries reported, but for the airplane not to have immediately caught on fire and mass casualties, it's truly a miracle.
Oh yeah, this is nothing short of a miracle. Amen that everyone was able to make it away alive, 100% completely safe. Only some, there was not one person who didn't make it. And this is nothing short of a miracle, guys. Now, this was Delta Flight 4819, operated by Endeavor Air, flying from Minneapolis, St. Paul, MSP, to Toronto Pearson, YYZ, on February 17, 2025, yesterday, less than 24 hours ago. In fact, this is still breaking news as they're still currently investigating the situation. But the airplane crashed at approximately 2:45 p.m. local time. Now, the plane, it's a Bombardier CRJ 900. It was carrying 76 passengers. It had a crew of 4 members and ultimately 80 people in total. The scary part here, guys, is that after the landing, the aircraft flipped over, breaking off its wing and its tail section and briefly catching fire. Now, a lot of people were initially looking at the photographs of the airplane upside down, and people believed that the airplane had landed upside down. But what had actually happened, according to reports and according to the video that I'm going to show you guys in just a little bit, is that the aircraft actually flipped over after it had already landed. Now, miraculously, everyone survived. Thankfully, thank God. Please type amen in the comments, guys. However, 18 people were unfortunately injured, with 2 people in critical condition. And this included a child. Now, fortunately, reports are already coming out saying that the injuries are not life-threatening, so that's very good. Someone was watching out for these folks on this plane. I mean, I'm telling you, I don't know what you guys believe, but that's what I believe. Anyway, emergency responders, they were on the scene immediately, and you can see that they were quickly putting out the fire. They're helping passengers evacuate safely. Some of the first videos from passengers are actually showing them walking away from the overturned aircraft as fire crews douse it with water and foam. And I mean, this is just really so wild. The only example I can think of right now, and maybe you guys can help me out with this in the comments, but the only other example that's kind of like this is the situation we saw in where, and they ended up making a movie out of it, where an aircraft landed in the Hudson River in New York City. I think Tom Hanks ended up being a star in that movie. Anyway, if you guys could help me out with the title of that movie, that would be great. But a lot of folks are wondering, how could this have happened? What could have caused this aircraft to flip upside down? And after this landing, like, how does a plane just flip over like this? It doesn't make any sense. Well, it turns out that this is not completely unheard of. So there was a similar crash in Somalia back in 2022 when a plane landed very hard and its wing tip hit the ground. And when that happened, it ended up flipping over, kind of like what we're seeing here. But let's look at the conditions that were in Toronto at the time of the crash that led up to this. So we have audio reports as well as written reports. And of course, we're still waiting for the FAA to do their official diagnosis investigation to let us know exactly what happened. They need to review the black box that's on the aircraft, but strong winds were reportedly coming out of the west at 27 knots, gusting up to 35 knots. The runway was actually covered in light snow. And as you guys can see from the footage that we have shared, the runway actually looks like it may have actually had some ice on it. That's what it looks like, but there was definitely, the runway was definitely covered in light snow. Temperature was -8 degrees Celsius. And so the runway condition was rated as a 5 on a scale of 0 to 6, with 0 being the worst and, 6 being the best. So the last part is very important. A 5 means that the runway is usable. It's just not that ideal, with some snow accumulation and parts of the runway, was the parts of the runway width was ultimately reduced due to some snow banks. But here's the real kicker, guys. The CRJ 900's maximum demonstrated crosswind limit is only 32 knots on a dry runway. But at the time of this crash, the winds were gusting up to 35 knots. And so the runway was not exactly dry, and it was snowy and possibly icy. So after touching down, the aircraft lost control, it flipped over, and it essentially broke apart, snapping its wing and its tail section. So ultimately, there's footage from passengers and airport cameras that actually show the wreckage upside down, with emergency crews quickly responding to attempt to extinguish the fire that had ignited on the aircraft's tail. Today, we are diving into a major healthcare crisis that no one's talking about. Did you know that the very drugs that we rely on for detecting cancer and life-threatening diseases are in short supply? That's right, guys. Contrast media, the essential radiology drugs used in MRIs, CT scans, and x-rays, they're running low worldwide. But don't worry, guys. There's a game-changing solution on the horizon. So stick with me, because this could be literally changing the future of medicine. So what are contrast media and why do they matter, right? Well, if you've ever had an MRI, if you've ever had a CT scan or an x-ray, chances are you've used contrast media. These drugs make it possible for doctors to see inside your body to detect cancer early and diagnose diseases. They're also made from 3 key minerals: barium, used in x-rays and CT scans to detect cancer in the digestive system; iodine, injected for MRIs, helping doctors find tumors and diseases in organs; and you also have gadolinium, used for brain scans to highlight abnormalities. But without these contrast agents, doctors are essentially flying blind. But here's the problem here, guys. There's a massive global shortage, and it's only getting worse. In fact, the global crisis could ultimately leave us in a situation where we run out. But there's 2 main reasons for this. Number one, you've got the rising demand, more diseases, more scans, and an aging population. All of this means that we need more contrast media than ever before. There's the limited supply. The raw materials used to make these drugs are controlled by just a handful of companies, and they're struggling to keep up. And because of this, manufacturers are cutting supplies to smaller countries and focusing only on major markets. This means millions of people worldwide don't have access to life-saving diagnostic tools. And to note, North America is import dependent of all transport or contrast media because we have no manufacturers in North America. Until now, the industry monopoly and who's in control? Well, the contrast media industry is dominated by 4 major companies: GE, Bracco, Bayer, and Gerbert. Now, here's the kicker. None of them own their own mineral resources. Instead, they rely on foreign suppliers, making the supply chain fragile and expensive. For example, GE controls a huge share of its iodine market because of a long-term deal GE made with a Chilean chemical company that makes their iodine chemical ingredient. Bracco holds a monopoly on barium contrast media, but it's synthetic and it's not natural. Bayer and Gerbert, well, they're struggling to compete due to mineral shortages. Now, with demand rising and supplies dwindling, contrast media prices are skyrocketing. And that's where the sponsor of today's video, Voyager Pharmaceuticals, comes in. Now, of course, Voyager Pharmaceuticals can be found on the TSXV exchange under ticker symbol VM, on the OTC Pink exchange under ticker symbol VYYRF. So Voyager is about to shake up the industry in a big way. And here's why they are the only company in North America that can fix this crisis. They own their own minerals. And unlike the big four, Voyager controls its supply of minerals for contrast agents. They are the only manufacturer in North America, creating a secure domestic supply chain, cutting out expensive overseas supply chains. They're vertically integrated from mining to drug production. They control the entire process. This means a cheaper, more stable, and more secure supply of contrast media, something that the healthcare industry desperately needs. The game-changing barium project? Well, right now, Voyager is importing barium for $7,300 per ton from third parties. But in 2025, they're set to launch their own mining project in Francis Creek in British Columbia, where they'll produce barium at just $650 per ton. That's over 70% profit margins and a major market disruption. The gold barium market is worth $600 million, and Voyager has the potential to take a 20% market share, generating $120 million in revenue. The breakthrough iodine solution. Now, Voyager isn't stopping at barium. They're tackling iodine next with a revolutionary streamlined iodine system in Oklahoma and in Utah. Now, unlike the traditional methods that waste up to 30% of iodine, their process may achieve a yield rate significantly larger, making it faster and cheaper than anything that the big four can do. So why does this matter, right? Well, right now, iodine contrast media is expensive because they have to extract the iodine minerals, convert them into iodine flake, a costly process, ship it to Europe and China for further processing, convert it back into iodine for radiology drugs. Voyager plans to skip all of those steps by extracting iodine from brine water and producing iodine drugs directly on site. This means lower costs, fewer supply chain issues, and faster production. So where is Voyager today, huh? Well, Voyager is already making moves, launching barium contrast media in Canada, seeking FDA approval for barium contrast media in the United States, fast-tracked in just 180 days, partnering with a top 5 contrast media manufacturer for future projects. And with the United States being the largest consumer of contrast media, Voyager is on track for major revenue in 2026. Bottom line here, guys, this isn't just about business, it's about saving lives. So right now, hospitals are struggling to get the contrast media that they need, and patients are suffering because of it. Voyager is stepping up to fix the supply chain, reduce costs, and make diagnostic drugs accessible to everyone. Now, of course, Voyager Pharmaceuticals can be found on the TSXV exchange under ticker symbol VM, on the OTC Pink exchange under ticker symbol VYYRF. Now, this is one of the biggest medical disruptions in years, guys, and you heard it here first. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment down below with your thoughts, and let's get this conversation started because everyone deserves access to life-saving diagnostics, right? Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next video. So, the first responders, they're super quick. They were Johnny on the spot, immediately out there. The first responders helped passengers evacuate safely. And so, again, this is the 4th plane crash since President Donald Trump's inauguration. And this is just really interesting. There was another plane crash in Washington, D.C., where, it involved the American Airlines crashing into or colliding with a Black Hawk helicopter. And ultimately, President Trump came on and his press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, had confirmed that the helicopter had been flying hundreds of feet too high, should have pulled away. And there are a number of different reasons that were indicated for that particular crash. But it's just really odd how frequently this is happening. And a lot of people are wondering, is it even safe to travel by air anymore? Like, is it, should we cancel our upcoming vacations because of this? It's really scary what's going on. But the question is, could wind have flipped the plane upside down? So let's go ahead and break this down a little bit, right? So you got the runway. The runway direction was 230 degrees, runway 23. The wind was coming in from 270 degrees, which means that there was a 40-degree crosswind that was hitting the plane as it landed. And I've actually been on a plane when it has to kind of land in a fashion that's really not direct. It almost looks like the airplane is drifting into a landing. It is really scary. And if I were wearing a hat, I would definitely tip it to the flight crew, to the flight captains, to the pilots, to the co-pilot. Hey, by the way, guys, if you're one of the real ones who really enjoy what we do here on the channel, you've got to check out the Inner Circle. This is where our true supporters get exclusive access to content that I just can't share here, completely commercial free. It's also the best way to keep this channel going strong. So if you want to be a part of something special, join us over there. Links in the description or in the pinned comment down below. Absolutely amazing and a masterful skill set to be able to land in those conditions. But what made this one even tougher is that the surface of the runway it wasn't ideal. There was ice, or there was definitely some light snow, possibly ice patches. The crosswind landings they're already tough. But if a sudden gust of wind hits the plane at the wrong moment on top of these crosswind landings, this literally could have tilted the wing, causing it to strike the ground, which is exactly how the plane crashed in Somalia. And so if you add to the fact that you have a runway that has snow and or ice on it, this is almost an impossible landing. So there was clearly some act of God here that helped these folks make it off of this plane alive. So now, if this is what happened here, once the wingtip hit the ground, the plane's momentum could have easily flipped it over. And if we add to the fact, in a slippery runway, it makes even more sense why the pilots might have struggled to control it. Now, authorities will now ultimately be focusing on how exactly did this plane flip upside down. Given the 40-degree crosswind at the landing, investigators are going to be examining whether the wind maybe was a little bit too strong for the CRJ-900's crosswind limits. Additionally, there's factors such as pilot response, runway conditions, mechanical issues that will be analyzed. Of course, the FAA is going to likely look at air traffic control. Did we have all of the qualified workers working the air traffic control towers? Should air traffic control have requested that the pilots land at a different airport? Should air traffic control have signaled to have on-site on-prem service to service the runway before the landing? There's a lot of things that are definitely going to be analyzed post accident. So the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, the TSB, is leading this investigation with assistance from the United States National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, as per the International Aviation Protocols, the ICAO Annex 13. So is this happening more often is the question that I keep hearing. And it's definitely the question that I'm thinking. I feel like it definitely feels like it's happening more often, and it definitely feels like the frequency, at least in the recent last several weeks, is higher, right? This is the second CRJ crash in just a month. The first one happened in Washington, D.C., involving American Airlines CRJ 700, which ultimately, unfortunately, did result in fatalities then. But while the CRJ 900 has historically had an excellent safety record, only 2 total losses since its 2003 debut, with no major fatalities. So it's got a great track record. Think about it. Only 2 total losses since 2003. And of course, these recent crashes will likely bring renewed scrutiny to the aircraft's performance under challenging conditions, and we would hope so, because after each accident happens, the FAA and the NTSB and all the different controlling bodies, governing bodies, they do a thorough analysis to understand how these things have happened in order to prevent future undesirable events like this from happening in the future. people are wondering if plane crashes are suddenly now becoming more common. But experts say it's more about how fast news spreads today. Now, I don't know what you guys believe, but I'm just saying there's every one of these accidents that we're talking about here have taken place after President Trump's inauguration, and I just find that incredibly odd. I don't know about you guys. Now, the last fatal crash in the United States before the DC accident was almost 15 years ago. So commercial air travel technically is still incredibly safe, especially when you consider how many accidents happen on the road and people don't walk away from them. So the question now that people are wondering is like, well, okay, well, what's going to happen next? Well, according to the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, the TSB is leading this investigation with the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, assisting them. And so they're going to be looking at a number of different things. They're going to look at the weather conditions at the time of landing. They're going to be looking at the pilot decision-making skills. Did they have a choice to divert? Possible mechanical failures, maybe. Whether air traffic control played a role in this. Any history of issues with this particular CRJ 900. So definitely a number of factors are going to be considered in this investigation. But at the end of the day, despite the numerous concerns that are coming in from the public, from me, from you guys, and let me know where you guys are watching from. Do you have confidence in flying right now? Or do you think that this is just a rare coincidence and it's unlikely to happen if you were to fly? Let me know, guys. But again, experts are emphasizing that air travel remains the safest mode of transportation, even in light of these recent incidents. So, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but whenever I'm landing, I always I don't care if I was sleeping the whole flight, the moment I'm realizing, hey, we're about to land, my eyes are glued out the window. Not like I could help the plane if we were having any kind of incident, but I can't help but look out the window and ultimately admire the skills of the pilots for landing a plane. Even in ideal conditions, I think landing a plane is just it's a marvelous execution. But then when we add these increased challenges such as wind, gusts, runway conditions, possible mechanical failures. I mean, there's just all sorts of things that pilots have to deal with. And each of these pilots is not just, responsible for their own life, but they're responsible for potentially hundreds of lives on the plane. So, my greatest respects go to these pilots out there, and the parents that raised them. Anyway, so the last crash that was fatal in the United States was before the DC accident. That was like 15 years ago. But of course, the increasing speed of social media, global news coverage, it does make these incidents seem a little bit more visible, definitely more visible. But statistically, they're saying that flying is still far safer than driving a car. I don't know if you guys agree, but that's what they're saying statistically. Now, for now, the biggest takeaway is that this could have been a whole lot worse. And, I'm grateful that it wasn't, amen for that. Right, guys? So appreciate the quick response from the emergency crews and everyone making it out alive. This is definitely a very concerning incident, but thankfully everyone made it out alive. And that's just truly incredible if you think about it, especially when you look at the video, right? After investigators worked to, figure out exactly what went wrong, one thing is very clear. These strong winds and tricky landing conditions, they have definitely pushed this plane a little bit past its limit. So let me know your thoughts, guys. What are your thoughts? Do you think that the pilots should have tried to land in those conditions? Or do you feel like maybe the pilot should have diverted and tried to land at a different airport? Or let me know your thoughts. Hit me up in the comments. Thanks so much for hitting the like button and subscribing. We'll see you next time.